I was standing in the kitchen rinsing out a glass when I heard the sound of my fence rattling. Not the creak of wood in the wind or a squirrel scrambling across it. No, this was deliberate, awkward, heavy. I glanced out the window toward the pool, and sure enough, there she was. HOA Karen, clinging to the top of my 6-foot privacy fence like a raccoon in yoga pants, one leg already dangling over as if she were mounting a horse. It was close to midnight, the pool lights glowing blue, and she was about to swan dive into water that wasn't hers. My first thought wasn't anger, though. It was amusement, because she had no idea who was waiting for her on the other side. See, I'd gotten used to her obsession with my pool. She'd hinted about community access, ranted about fair use, and once even proposed the HOA draft a bylaw allowing her family to use it in emergencies, though no one could figure out what kind of chlorine-based emergency she meant. But she'd never gone this far. She hadn't just crossed a line tonight, she was scaling it, flip-flops and all. I quietly slid open the patio door and stepped out, letting the night air hit me. My security lights flicked on, flooding the deck in sharp white. Karen froze halfway down the fence like a burglar in a cartoon freeze frame. Her mouth opened, but instead of backing down, she gritted her teeth and hopped the rest of the way, landing with a splash of gravel. She dusted her hands, squared her shoulders, and muttered, "Well, if you won't share, I'll just help myself." She didn't notice the man already seated by the pool. My brother-in-law, Tom, was sipping a beer in one of the lounge chairs, clipboard on his lap, badge on his belt glinting under the light. Tom's a county inspector, the kind who makes people's blood pressure spike when he knocks on their door. Tonight, he looked like he'd been waiting for a show. Karen finally spotted him when she turned toward the water, yanking off her sandals. Her body went rigid. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded, voice rising with that false authority she carried everywhere. "County Inspector," Tom said calmly, flipping a page on his clipboard. "And you are currently trespassing. On camera." He nodded toward the corner of the deck, where my new motion-triggered security camera blinked red. I leaned against the railing and sipped my water like it was popcorn. "Karen, you could have just knocked on the front door, you know. Midnight pool parties are a little old school, don't you think?" She tried to regain footing, but her voice trembled with indignation. "This is common property. The HOA has jurisdiction here. You can't just gate off amenities that belong to all of us." Tom raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Ma'am, this isn't common property. Tax records, deed, and the fencing you just climbed all say otherwise. Unless the HOA suddenly annexed my brother-in-law's backyard without filing paperwork, you've got no legal ground to stand on." Karen's lips curled. She was cornered, but she wasn't retreating. Not her style. "I'll bring this up at the next meeting," she snapped. "I'll get the board to vote. You can't deny neighbors fair access. It's discrimination." I chuckled. Discrimination? Against what? People who can't resist chlorine. Tom was scribbling notes now, his flashlight beam tracing the scuff marks she'd left on my fence. Attempted unauthorized entry, property damage, trespassing at night. That's already 3 separate violations. Hope you've got a good lawyer. Her face drained, then flushed bright red. She looked like she wanted to argue but realized she was already neck-deep. Instead, she went on the offensive. "You set me up. This is entrapment." I shook my head slowly. "No, Karen. This is me sitting in my own house, minding my own business, while you decided to impersonate Spider-Man on my fence. You walked into this one all by yourself." For a few seconds, the only sound was the soft gurgle of the pool filter. Then, without warning, Karen kicked off her other sandal and bolted toward the water. She jumped, a perfect cannonball splash exploding in the middle of the pool. Chlorine mist rained over the deck, soaking Tom's clipboard. I groaned. "Really? You're going with the 'if I'm already here, might as well swim' defense?" Tom wiped water from his face, looking equal parts annoyed and entertained. "You know I have to report this, right?" Karen resurfaced, hair plastered to her forehead. She splashed defiantly, eyes blazing. Go ahead. Write your little report. The HOA protects me. You'll see. I crouched by the pool edge, lowering my voice so it cut sharp through the night. Karen, you've crossed from annoying to criminal. And for once, you won't get away with it. The weight of my words seemed to land, because for the first time I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Doubt. She climbed out of the pool, dripping wet, muttering threats under her breath as she stomped across the deck. When she reached the fence, she realized the wet wood was too slick to climb. Trapped, she spun back toward us. That was when Tom pulled out his phone. Sheriff's office is 2 minutes away. Want to keep going? Her jaw clenched. She scanned for an escape route, but my yard was built like a fortress. Finally, she slumped into a patio chair, soaked and seething. Fine. You win tonight. But this isn't over. I gave her a thin smile. It never is with you, Karen. What she didn't realize, though, was that this night was just the beginning. The next HOA meeting was in 3 days, and she was about to find out that climbing my fence for a swim had set off a chain of events that would unravel her little empire piece by piece. And as she sat dripping on my patio, waiting for deputies to arrive, I realized something. Karen thought she'd broken into my yard to take power. What she'd actually done was hand me the perfect weapon to dismantle her reign over the entire neighborhood. The deputies arrived 10 minutes later, headlights sweeping across my driveway, tires crunching over gravel. Karen sat slumped in the chair, dripping like a sulking toddler, while Tom calmly explained what had happened. I didn't even need to say much. Between the security footage and Karen herself sitting there soaking wet, the story practically told itself. The officers tried to keep straight faces, but one of them cracked a smile when Tom mentioned how she'd leapt into the pool as if chlorine were a constitutional right. Karen, of course, tried to spin it. "This is harassment," she snapped, arms folded tightly over her chest. "You're conspiring against me. I was just making sure the pool wasn't a hazard to the community." "By climbing a fence at midnight?" the younger deputy asked dryly. "It's called due diligence," she shot back. I could see the frustration tightening around her eyes. She wasn't used to being the one cornered. Usually, she was the aggressor, lording over HOA bylaws like they were holy scripture. But here, dripping in my chair with police flashlights on her, she looked less like a queen and more like a soaked cat that had fallen into a bathtub. They issued her a trespassing citation and warned her she'd be arrested next time. I thought that would be the end of it, maybe even a lesson learned. But Karen didn't retreat. She doubled down. The very next morning, she was back in power mode. I woke up to find a notice taped to my mailbox. HOA violation, unauthorized use of amenities. According to her, my pool was a shared resource I had illegally privatized. She even claimed that the bylaws gave the board rights to repurpose unused spaces for community benefit. And apparently, in her mind, my backyard pool counted as one of those. I laughed when I read it, but the humor faded when my phone lit up with messages from neighbors. Some were screenshots of emails Karen had blasted out overnight, others were panicked questions. She was spinning the story, claiming I had attacked her when she came to inspect safety hazards. A few neighbors even admitted she'd made it sound believable, though most knew better. By noon, she had called an emergency HOA board meeting for that evening. That was when I knew. She wasn't backing down, she was escalating. I decided to play the long game. Instead of storming over or firing off an angry email, I called a couple of neighbors I trusted, including Eleanor, the retired teacher who'd lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone, and Jake, the 20-something kid who documented everything on his phone like it was a part-time job. They both agreed to come to the meeting. Tom, of course, insisted on tagging along too. "If she wants to play this in front of the board," he said, "then let's make it official." The HOA clubhouse was packed that night. Normally, these meetings barely drew 6 people, but word of Karen's midnight dip had spread like wildfire. The room buzzed with whispers as we filed in. Karen sat at the head of the table, hair perfectly blown out, face tight with forced calm. She tapped a gavel on the table, trying to command authority. "Order," she said sharply, though no one was talking loud enough to need silencing. "We are here to discuss gross violations of community standards by Mr. Johnson." That would be me. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded, letting her have the stage. She thrived on drama. Interrupting her only fed her fire. Better to let her burn herself out. Karen launched into a speech about communal harmony and the dangers of unchecked individualism. She claimed my fence was too tall, my pool was too deep, and that my refusal to share it threatened neighborhood unity. At one point, she even suggested children could suffer psychological distress from seeing a pool they weren't allowed to use. The room murmured with disbelief, but Karen plowed on, waving her notes like evidence in a courtroom. Finally, she called for a vote to reclassify my backyard as shared property. That was when Tom cleared his throat. "Before you vote on something like that, you might want to consider state law." He pulled out a folder, flipping it open with theatrical precision. "Property lines are clear. The HOA has no legal claim over private amenities. And by the way," he held up a still frame from my security footage, "Karen mid-cannonball into my pool. Trespassing carries heavier penalties when it's recorded." Gasps rippled through the room. Jake grinned as he angled his phone to capture the screen. Eleanor muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, "Got her." Karen's face turned scarlet. "This is irrelevant. He's weaponizing personal footage against me. That's a privacy violation." Tom smirked. "Not when you're trespassing on someone else's property. That's just evidence." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Even Karen's usual allies shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with her overreach. One finally cleared his throat. "Maybe we should table this until we review the bylaws more closely." Karen slammed the gavel. "No. We vote tonight." But before she could force it through, Eleanor stood up. "Karen, enough. We're not children. We all know the pool isn't ours. You embarrassed yourself. Don't drag the whole neighborhood into your mistake." The room erupted into murmurs of agreement. Karen tried to shout them down, but the momentum had shifted. She wasn't dictating anymore, she was scrambling. I decided it was time to twist the knife, calmly and with a smile. "If the board's really concerned, I'll be happy to host an open pool day next month. We'll grill, swim, make it a proper event. But under my invitation, not by coercion." That got cheers. Suddenly, I wasn't the selfish neighbor hoarding water. I was the generous one extending goodwill. Karen's narrative collapsed right there in front of her. She tried to recover, but her voice cracked as she yelled, "This isn't fair. You're all being manipulated. He's dangerous. Dangerous. Over a pool." The board ended the meeting abruptly, and Karen stormed out, heels clacking like gunfire on the tile. But as I walked home, neighbors patting me on the back, I knew she wasn't finished. People like Karen never surrender gracefully. She'd already been humiliated twice, once at my pool, once in the clubhouse. She'd come back swinging, and the next round wouldn't be subtle. I was right. The very next morning, a city inspector showed up at my door with a complaint about illegal pool construction. Karen had filed a report accusing me of everything from improper permits to unsafe depth. But what she didn't know was that Tom's department oversaw exactly those permits. And by filing a fraudulent complaint, she hadn't just annoyed me, she'd tangled herself in a legal net far bigger than she could wriggle out of. And as Tom flipped through his clipboard, grinning at the inspector who'd been reluctantly dispatched, I realized the war had only just begun. The city inspector looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He stood on my porch holding a clipboard, shifting uncomfortably as he explained the complaint. "Anonymous report about an unpermitted pool construction," he muttered, his eyes flicking toward the backyard where my pool glittered in the sun. "Says it's too deep, potentially hazardous, maybe not built to code." I raised an eyebrow. "Anonymous? Let me guess. Female, mid-40s, obsessed with rules she doesn't understand. The inspector gave me a look that said he couldn't confirm but also didn't need to. Look, I have to do the inspection because it came through the system. Won't take long. Do you mind? Not at all, I said, opening the gate. Tom had already come out onto the porch, arms crossed, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't say anything, just followed us around back like a man watching a rerun of his favorite sitcom. The inspector checked the permits first. I'd kept every piece of paper from when the pool was built, neatly filed in a binder. He flipped through them, nodding. Then he measured the depth, checked the fencing, examined the filter system. Every detail was up to code. Finally, he lowered his clipboard and exhaled. This is one of the cleanest pools I've inspected this month, he said. Frankly, whoever filed this complaint wasted everyone's time. Tom grinned. Sounds like you should note the false report on the record. That's usually a violation in itself. The inspector gave him a knowing look. Already writing it down. I leaned against the railing, gazing at the sparkling water. So what happens to the person who filed the complaint? He shrugged. Depends. If it's deemed malicious, there could be fines. If it's part of a pattern, it could escalate. But that's not my department. That was enough to satisfy me. The key wasn't punishing Karen directly. It was letting her dig her own grave with every desperate move. And she was digging fast. By the time the inspector left, half the neighborhood knew what had happened. Jake, naturally, had caught the whole inspection on video from his upstairs window and posted it in the community group chat with the caption, "Karen's pool complaint equals instant fail." The replies poured in, half jokes about pool noodles, half irritation at how much trouble she was causing. But Karen wasn't slowing down. If anything, the failed inspection seemed to make her more determined. 2 days later, I found her standing at the edge of my driveway with a tape measure, pacing off distances like she was preparing for a construction project. "What exactly are you doing?" I asked, leaning against my mailbox. She didn't look up. "Measuring setbacks. I believe your fence violates Section 12 of the HOA Landscaping Code. It's too close to the easement." I laughed. "Karen, this fence was here before the HOA even existed." "That doesn't matter," she snapped. "The rules apply retroactively." "Pretty sure they don't," I said calmly. "But feel free to waste more of your time." Her nostrils flared. "You think you're clever. But I'm protecting the community from people like you, selfish, controlling, unwilling to share." I shook my head slowly. "No, Karen. You're protecting your ego. And right now, it's drowning." She stormed off, muttering something about bylaws and appeals. I knew what was coming next. Another HOA meeting, another attempt to rally the board against me. But what she didn't realize was that her credibility was evaporating with every stunt. Neighbors who once tolerated her were beginning to see through the act. At the next board meeting, the clubhouse was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different. People weren't there to listen to Karen. They were there to laugh. Karen marched to the front, clutching her folder of evidence. She started by accusing me of harassing her, then pivoted to how my fence was intimidating and exclusionary. At one point, she claimed the shadows from my fence reduced property values by creating oppressive energy. That was when Eleanor spoke up. "Karen, enough. You're embarrassing yourself. Last week it was the pool, now it's shadows?" "What's next?" Accusing his mailbox of blocking sunlight. The room erupted in laughter. Karen slammed her folder shut, but the damage was done. Her credibility wasn't just cracked, it was shattered. I decided to deliver the coup de grace. Calm, measured, and perfectly timed. "For the record," I said, standing up, "I have no issue cooperating with the board. If you'd like, I'll host another community pool day this summer. Bring the kids, bring food, we'll make it fun. But that's by invitation, not by decree. And as for the fence, well, it's been inspected and approved multiple times. If Karen wants to keep filing complaints, she's free to. But each one just adds to the record of harassment." The board members nodded, clearly relieved to have an alternative to Karen's madness. One even muttered, "Finally, someone reasonable." Karen's face was a mask of fury. She gathered her papers, stuffed them into her bag, and stormed out without another word. The meeting moved on to budget discussions, but no one was paying attention anymore. Everyone knew the real show had already ended. Or so they thought. Later that week, I got a knock on the door. It wasn't the police or an inspector, it was a process server, handing me an envelope. Karen had filed a civil complaint against me in small claims court, alleging emotional distress and loss of community enjoyment. I almost laughed out loud as I flipped through the paperwork. The claims were flimsy, the evidence non-existent, but it was clear what she was trying to do: escalate the fight onto a bigger stage. Tom read over the papers and smirked. This is perfect. She just moved the game into a venue where every lie is a matter of record. And judges don't like people who waste their time. I nodded. Then I guess it's time we stop playing defense. We started gathering evidence. Security footage, inspection reports, witness statements from neighbors. Jake even volunteered his videos of Karen measuring my driveway like a deranged land surveyor. Eleanor offered to testify about her behavior at meetings. Piece by piece, we built a case so airtight it practically squeaked. The irony was delicious. Karen thought dragging me into court would intimidate me. What she didn't realize was that she had just handed me the ultimate platform to expose her antics in front of an authority she couldn't manipulate. And as I organized the files on my desk, neatly stacked and labeled, I couldn't help but smile. Because if Karen thought climbing my fence for a midnight swim was bold, she had no idea what was waiting for her on the other side of a courtroom. Court day came sooner than expected. The notice set the hearing for a Wednesday morning, and by then the entire neighborhood knew. People whispered about it at the mailbox kiosks, kids whispered about it while riding their bikes, and Jake promised me he'd skip his shift just to sit in the gallery with popcorn. I arrived at the courthouse with Tom, who insisted on coming in his county inspector uniform, partly for authority and partly because he enjoyed the theatrics. Eleanor walked in a few minutes later, carrying a folder as neatly organized as any attorney's brief. And sure enough, Karen showed up in a bright red blazer that screamed desperation. She strutted in like she was the star witness in a nationally televised trial. We were called in quickly. Small claims court isn't glamorous. Fluorescent lights, a judge who looked like she hadn't had coffee yet, and a bailiff who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. But Karen treated it like Broadway. She slammed her papers on the table, adjusted her scarf, and when it was her turn, launched into a dramatic monologue about how I'd ruined her sense of community. "Your Honor," she said, voice trembling with practiced indignation, "this man has created an atmosphere of hostility. His pool mocks us with its exclusivity. His fence is a wall of oppression. I've suffered anxiety, sleepless nights, and humiliation at HOA meetings because of his selfishness." The judge raised one eyebrow. "And what damages are you claiming, exactly?" Karen straightened. $5,000. "For?" the judge prompted. She hesitated. "For emotional distress and community enjoyment lost." A chuckle rippled through the gallery. Jake coughed loudly to disguise his laugh, but the judge shot him a look that silenced the room. Then it was my turn. I didn't launch into theatrics. I didn't need to. I simply handed over the binder of evidence I'd prepared. Security footage of Karen climbing my fence. Photographs of her sitting in my patio chair, dripping wet. The inspector's report clearing my pool. Witness statements from Eleanor and others. Each page stacked neatly, each piece of evidence undeniable. Tom leaned over and whispered, "You're burying her alive with paperwork." The judge flipped through the binder, lips tightening with every page. Finally, she looked up at Karen. "Ma'am, not only do I find your claim baseless, but the evidence here strongly suggests you have been engaging in a pattern of harassment. Filing frivolous complaints, trespassing, attempting to reclassify private property as communal, these are not the actions of a plaintiff with clean hands." Karen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to argue, but the judge held up a hand. Stop. If you continue down this path, you may find yourself facing counterclaims. Do you want to proceed? For the first time since this started, Karen faltered. She glanced around the room, clearly realizing she'd lost the audience. Even her usual allies from the HOA looked away, embarrassed. She muttered something about withdrawing, but the judge wasn't done. Withdrawal is noted. However, I'm issuing a formal warning. Any further frivolous complaints or harassment toward the defendant will carry consequences. Gavel down. Case dismissed. Just like that. Outside the courtroom, Jake caught up to me, grinning from ear to ear. Man, that was brutal. She looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. Eleanor patted my arm. Well done. You handled it better than I would have. But Tom was more serious. She's not finished. You embarrassed her in front of a judge. People like Karen don't stop, they escalate. He was right. Because the very next week, Karen unveiled her boldest move yet. It started with flyers. Brightly colored sheets stuffed into every mailbox, taped to lampposts, pinned to bulletin board. The headline screamed, "Save our neighborhood! Take back our pool!" In the flyer, Karen announced her plan to create a community recreation initiative. According to her, the HOA had the right to repurpose underutilized private resources for communal benefit. Translation: she wanted to commandeer my pool and declare it open access. The kicker? She scheduled a community vote at the clubhouse. No HOA approval, no legal backing, just Karen manufacturing authority out of thin air. Neighbors showed me the flyers, half laughing, half horrified. Some thought it was a joke. Others worried about what would happen if Karen actually convinced enough people. I decided to attend. Not just attend, prepare. On the night of the so-called vote, the clubhouse was packed again. Karen stood at the front with a giant poster board that read, "Yes to Community Pool," in thick black letters. She had snacks on a table, chips, soda, cookies, as if she were running a campaign rally. "Friends and neighbors," she began, "we've all seen how one man's selfishness has divided us. But tonight we can take back what's rightfully ours. Vote yes, and this pool becomes a shared treasure. Vote no, and he keeps hoarding it." Murmurs spread. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked at her theatrics. That was when I stepped forward. "Before you vote, let me clear a few things up. 1. My pool is not under HOA jurisdiction. It's private property, recognized by county records and state law. 2. Trespassing is illegal. And 3. I held up my phone, projecting the county property map onto the clubhouse wall. Any attempt to enforce this vote would itself be unlawful. Which means Karen isn't just wrong. She's encouraging all of you to commit a crime." Gasp. A few laughed. Jake recorded everything, of course. Karen's face twisted with fury. "He's lying. He's trying to scare you." Tom, who had been sitting quietly in the back, stood up and held his badge high. "No, he's telling the truth. And if anyone tries to follow through with this stunt, you'll be getting a visit from my department, and possibly the sheriff's office." The room shifted instantly. People who had been on the fence, or just there for the free chips, now wanted no part of Karen's crusade. One by one, they got up and left. Within minutes, the clubhouse was nearly empty, leaving Karen standing in front of her poster board like a failed politician after election night. "You'll regret this," she spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You think you've won, but I'll find another way." I just smiled, calm and measured. "Karen, you keep promising that. And every time, it just gets worse for you." As I walked out, neighbors whispered their thanks, some even patting me on the back. Jake muttered something about uploading the footage to Reddit. Eleanor shook her head and sighed. "She's unraveling. And when people like that unravel, they don't go quietly." She was right. Because Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The pool war had moved beyond bylaws, beyond flyers, beyond courtrooms. And the next move she made would be bigger, louder, and far more dangerous than anyone expected. And I had a feeling I knew exactly what it would be. I should have known Karen wouldn't stay quiet for long. The flyers, the failed vote, the courtroom humiliation, each setback only seemed to fuel her like gasoline on a fire. For a few days she was unusually silent, and I almost let myself believe she'd finally gotten tired. But then, late on a Saturday afternoon, the silence shattered. I was on the back porch grilling steaks when the first truck pulled up. Then another. And another. Within minutes, 3 landscaping crews were unloading gear onto my front lawn, ladders, hedge trimmers, wheelbarrows filled with cement bags. At first, I thought they'd made a mistake. Then Karen appeared, striding down the sidewalk with a clipboard like a dictator inspecting her troop. "Stop," I called, setting down the tongs. "What do you think you're doing?" She waved her clipboard triumphantly. "Improving community safety. These contractors are here to remove your illegal fence and repurpose your pool area into a shared space." The HOA voted unanimously. I nearly laughed. "Karen, there was no legal vote. And even if there had been, you can't just hire strangers to tear down my fence." She smirked. "Watch me." The contractors hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. One of them, a burly guy in a neon vest, looked at me nervously. "Sir, she signed the work order. Said she was HOA president. We're just here to do our job." I pulled out my phone and dialed Tom immediately. He answered on the second ring. "Let me guess. Karen's escalating again? She's got 3 crews in my yard with demolition gear. Hold them off. I'm on my way." Karen barked orders at the workers like a general in battle. "Take down the east fence first. And measure the pool deck. We'll need space for community seating." I stepped in front of the gate. "Nobody touches anything until the police get here. If you start, you'll be liable for trespassing and property damage." The workers froze. They weren't paid enough to get caught in a neighborhood feud. That was when Tom's truck roared into the driveway. He hopped out, county badge already in hand, and marched straight up to Karen. "These men aren't touching a single thing," he said. "You forged authority you don't have. That's fraud." Karen's face twisted. "You don't scare me. You're just his family. You're biased." Tom turned to the contractors. "Gentlemen, if you proceed, you'll be complicit in a felony. I suggest you pack up." That did it. Within minutes, the crews were loading their gear back into the trucks, muttering apologies as they drove off. Karen screamed after them, "You'll regret this. I'll sue every one of you for breach of contract." But her audience was gone. It was just her, Tom, and me standing in the fading light of day. I kept my voice calm, measured, almost gentle. "Karen, you've crossed into criminal territory now. Fraud, misrepresentation, attempted property destruction. You need to stop." Her eyes glistened with fury. "You think you've won? You think this fence makes you untouchable? I'll bring the whole county down on you if I have to." She stormed off, leaving silence behind her. But it wasn't the relieved kind of silence. It was the heavy, ominous silence of something brewing just out of sight. 2 days later, I found out what she'd been plotting. A city notice arrived in the mail, stating that my property was scheduled for an emergency safety inspection. Apparently, someone had reported that my pool chemicals were hazardous, that chlorine fumes were poisoning the neighborhood. Tom shook his head when I showed him the letter. "She's desperate. But if she drags in environmental safety, this could snowball." Sure enough, inspectors in hazmat gear showed up at my door. They tested the pool water, checked my storage shed, examined every inch of the property. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering like it was a crime scene. When the lead inspector finally removed his respirator, he gave me an exasperated look. "Sir, your pool chemicals are standard. Whoever filed this complaint clearly doesn't understand basic chemistry. This is a waste of taxpayer money." I could almost hear Karen grinding her teeth from across the street. She was standing on her porch, arms crossed, glaring at me like she could burn holes through my skin. The inspectors left, but the neighborhood buzz remained. This wasn't just drama anymore, it was becoming theater. Neighbors stopped me at the mailbox, shaking their heads, whispering that Karen had gone too far. Even her allies were peeling away, realizing she was making them all look ridiculous. But Karen didn't slow down. That Friday, she pulled her boldest stunt yet. I woke at 2 a.m. to flashing red and blue lights strobing through my blind. I ran outside to find 2 sheriff's deputies in my driveway. Behind them stood Karen, hair disheveled, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "He's endangering the community," she screamed, pointing at me. "He's storing explosives in his shed." One deputy sighed. "Sir, mind if we take a look?" I gestured toward the shed. "Be my guest." They opened it, flicked on their flashlights, and found exactly what I said they'd find. Gardening tools, pool supplies, a lawnmower, a leaf blower. No explosives. No contraband. Nothing. The deputies shut the shed and turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, this is the 3rd time this month we've responded to one of your calls about your neighbor. If you keep filing false reports, you're the one who's going to end up in cuffs." Karen's face twisted with rage and desperation. "You're all blind. He's manipulating you. He's manipulating everyone." The deputies ignored her, muttered apologies to me, and drove off. Karen stayed frozen in my driveway for a moment, shaking with fury. Then she bolted, disappearing into the shadows of her house. I stood there in the dark, heart pounding, adrenaline coursing. She had finally done it. She'd crossed the last line. False police reports weren't just harassment, they were criminal. And if the sheriff's deputies hadn't arrested her yet, they would soon. Tom confirmed it the next day. I made a few calls. "She's on record now. The sheriff's office is tired of her games. It's only a matter of time." But even knowing that, I couldn't shake the feeling she had one more trick up her sleeve. Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly. No, she'd try one last desperate move to save face, even if it meant dragging the whole neighborhood into chaos with her. And sure enough, a week later, the HOA newsletter arrived in everyone's mailbox. On the front page, in bold letters, was a headline: "Special Community Meeting, Vote TO Remove Troublemaker." And under it, my name. Karen wasn't going to court again. She wasn't calling inspectors or cops. She was going for the nuclear option, kicking me out of the neighborhood altogether. But what she didn't realize was that I was already 5 moves ahead. The newsletter hit like a thunderclap. My name, plastered across every mailbox in the neighborhood, framed by Karen's narrative of me as a dangerous, divisive influence who refuses to respect community standards. It was audacious even by her standards. She wasn't just trying to embarrass me now, she was trying to exile me. Neighbors showed up at my door almost immediately. Some waved the flyer in disbelief, others apologized on her behalf, and a few just shook their heads, muttering that they were tired of the drama. Eleanor arrived with her copy folded neatly, eyes flashing with indignation. "She's overstepped," she said firmly. "No HOA has the authority to remove a homeowner. That meeting will be her undoing." Tom, ever the strategist, leaned against my kitchen counter, flipping the flyer in his hands. "This is desperation. She's cornered. But cornered people fight dirty. You can't just go in there and play defense. You need to bury her once and for all." He was right. I couldn't afford to let this play out like the other skirmishes. Karen was betting that sheer drama and intimidation would win her the crowd. If I walked into that meeting with nothing but a calm demeanor, I'd be outshouted, outspun, and painted as the villain. No, this time I needed to bring receipts so damning that even her most loyal allies couldn't ignore them. So I spent the next 3 days preparing. Every security clip of her trespassing. Every inspector's report clearing my property. Copies of the police citations for false reports. Screenshots of her flyers, her emails, even text messages she'd blasted out to neighbors. Jake dug into his phone library and pulled up videos he'd taken from his window. Karen measuring my fence at 2 a.m., Karen yelling at contractors, Karen storming out of board meetings. Eleanor wrote a sworn statement detailing every stunt Karen had pulled in the past 6 months. By the time I was done, my binder looked less like a defense and more like a prosecution's exhibit. I wasn't just going to survive this meeting. I was going to end it. The night of the special community meeting, the clubhouse looked like it was hosting a circus. Cars lined the street, people milled around in clusters, the buzz of gossip filling the humid evening air. Inside, Karen had decorated the front table with a homemade banner, "Vote Yes for Harmony." She stood behind it in another bright blazer, eyes gleaming with manic energy. "Neighbors," she began, gavel in hand, "thank you for coming to this critical meeting. Tonight, we decide whether we allow one man to continue destroying our unity, or whether we take back control of our community." The crowd murmured. Some leaned forward eagerly, others crossed their arms, skeptical. I waited until she was halfway through her opening tirade before I stood up and walked calmly to the front. "Before anyone votes," I said, my voice even but loud enough to cut through the noise, "you deserve the full story." I set my binder on the table, opened it to the first page, and held up a printed still frame. Karen mid-cannonball into my pool, security timestamp glowing in the corner. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Karen's jaw tightened. "This," I continued, flipping to the next page, "is what started it. Trespassing, recorded and reported. Next came a fraudulent complaint to the city inspector. I turned another page, official letterhead clearing my property. Then came false reports about hazardous chemicals. Another page, hazmat team findings, no violations. And when that failed, she called the sheriff's office claiming I was storing explosives. I held up the police report, complete with the deputy's written warning to her. By now the room was buzzing. Heads shook. Whispers flew. I laid down the final page, a copy of the small claims court dismissal, signed by the judge. This isn't about community harmony. This is about one person's obsession with controlling what isn't hers. Karen slammed the gavel. "Lies. All lies. He's manipulating documents." Tom stood from the back, his county badge flashing in the fluorescent light. "Every one of those documents has already passed through official channels. I've verified them myself." Karen's face flushed crimson. "You're biased. Your family." Eleanor rose slowly, her voice calm but cutting. "Bias or not, Karen, we've all seen your behavior with our own eyes. This isn't leadership. It's harassment." The room erupted into applause. Even some of Karen's usual supporters clapped reluctantly. Karen's voice rose into a shriek. "You don't understand. He's dangerous. He's dividing us. If you don't remove him, this neighborhood will collapse." But the spell had broken. People were tired of her theatrics, tired of the drama, tired of being dragged into her personal war. The board president, a quiet man who usually avoided conflict, finally spoke. "Karen, this vote is not legitimate. We don't have the authority to remove a homeowner. And frankly, after reviewing this evidence, I think we need to discuss whether you should remain on this board." Gasps filled the room. Karen froze. "What? You can't." But he pressed on. "You've abused your position, harassed neighbors, and filed false reports. This community deserves better." The board members huddled briefly, whispering. Then the president turned back to the room. "All in favor of removing Karen from her role as HOA vice president?" Hands shot up. One after another, nearly unanimous. Even the people who had once defended her looked around nervously, then raised their hands. The president nodded. "The motion passes." Karen's scream tore through the clubhouse. "You traitors! All of you!" She grabbed her banner, crumpled it in her fists, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the gavel rattled off the table. Silence followed, broken only by the shuffling of papers and the collective exhale of relief. Neighbors turned to me, clapping my shoulder, thanking me for standing up to her. Jake caught it all on video, of course, already muttering about uploading it with the caption, HOA Karen finally dethroned. But even as the meeting wrapped up, I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen don't vanish because of one vote. They don't accept defeat gracefully. They cling to scraps of power, lash out, plot revenge. Sure enough, that night, as I walked back to my house, I noticed her blinds twitching across the street. A shadow moved back and forth, restless, frantic. And I realized with a chill that while she had lost her official title, she wasn't finished. In fact, stripped of her authority, she was more dangerous than ever. For 2 days after her removal from the board, Karen disappeared. No morning power walks in neon tracksuits, no angry muttering at the mailbox, no flyers taped to lampposts. It was eerie, like the eye of a storm passing over the neighborhood. Some neighbors thought maybe she'd finally given up, licking her wounds quietly. Eleanor wasn't so optimistic. "She's regrouping," she warned me as we walked back from the mailbox. "People like Karen don't stop. They reload." Eleanor was right. On the third night, just after midnight, I woke to the sound of splashing. At first, I thought it was raccoons or maybe a stray dog. But when I stepped onto the porch, my stomach dropped. Karen was back in my pool. This time not sneaking in, but parading around with a megaphone in one hand, sloshing water everywhere as she shouted, "Neighbors! This pool belongs to all of us. Tonight we reclaim our rights." Her voice cracked through the dark like a siren, amplified by the stillness of the hour. Lights flicked on up and down the street. Curtains shifted. Doors opened. Within minutes, half the neighborhood had gathered in their yards, bleary-eyed and stunned. Tom came jogging over from his house, phone already in his hand. "She's completely lost it," he muttered. Karen noticed him and doubled down. "You can't silence me. The bylaws grant us access to amenities, and he's hoarding this water like a tyrant. This is a revolution." I should have been furious, but instead, I felt a strange calm. It was over. Not the conflict itself, but the performance. Karen had finally gone so far off the rails that even her most sympathetic neighbors couldn't follow. Eleanor arrived in her bathrobe, arms crossed. "Karen," she said sharply, "get out of the pool. You look ridiculous." Karen whirled on her, water dripping from her hair. "You're all cowards. You let him manipulate you. But I won't be silenced. I'll—" She slipped. Her foot skidded on the wet concrete, and with a yelp she toppled backward, crashing into the shallow end. The megaphone floated beside her, squealing feedback. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tom and I rushed forward, hauling her out. She coughed, sputtered, eyes blazing with humiliation. "He pushed me," she shrieked, pointing at me. But this time, no one believed her. Neighbors shook their heads. Jake, of course, had been filming the whole thing, and he replayed the slip right there on his phone for everyone to see. The truth was undeniable. The deputies arrived minutes later, same ones who had already warned her twice. They listened patiently, then sighed. "Ma'am, we've given you every chance. But you've crossed too many lines." They read her rights as they placed cuffs on her wrists. Karen screamed, struggling against them. "You'll regret this. All of you. This isn't over." But this time it was. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring in disbelief. Some neighbors laughed quietly, others just shook their heads. Eleanor touched my arm gently. "You've done it. She won't be back from this." I exhaled, finally letting the tension drain from me. For months, Karen had been the shadow over my backyard, the constant noise in my life. And now, watching the patrol car's taillights disappear into the night, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed like never before. Word spread fast. Karen arrested, charged with trespassing, filing false reports, and harassment. By noon, Jake's video of her midnight revolution had already gone viral in the community group, complete with slow-motion replay of her slipping into the pool. Comments poured in, half jokes, half relief. But the real shock came 2 weeks later at the official HOA meeting. Without Karen's constant interruptions, the room felt lighter, almost cheerful. The board president opened with an announcement. Due to recent events, Karen has been permanently removed from the HOA board and barred from holding any future office. Cheers erupted. Eleanor raised her hand to propose something new, a neighborhood barbecue at my place, complete with an open swim day. The motion passed unanimously. For the first time in months, the HOA meeting ended with laughter instead of shouting. On the day of the barbecue, my backyard was full. Kids splashed in the pool, parents grilled burgers, music floated through the air. I leaned back in a lounge chair, watching the neighborhood come alive in the very space Karen had tried so hard to control. Tom sat beside me, sipping a beer. "You realize you've won, right? Not just against her. You've won the whole neighborhood." I shrugged. I didn't want to win anything. I just wanted to be left alone. "Funny thing about people like Karen," he said. "They think control is power. But real power is when people see through the act. You gave them that." Eleanor joined us, balancing a plate of potato salad. "She'll move eventually," she said confidently. "People like that can't stand to live where they've lost. Too much humiliation." And she was right. Within a month, Karen's house had a "for sale" sign out front. She didn't say goodbye. One day she was just gone, leaving nothing but her reputation behind. The neighborhood healed quickly. Meetings were civil again. Barbecues became regular events. The kids jokingly called my pool Karen's Folly, and every splash felt like another exorcism of her ghost. Sometimes, late at night, I'd glance at the fence and remember that first moment, Karen clinging to the top, flip-flops dangling, about to vault into my pool. It seemed almost comical now, but it had been the spark that ignited months of chaos. And yet, in a strange way, I was grateful. Because through it all, the neighborhood had found something stronger than her control: solidarity. Jake uploaded one final video, a montage of all the chaos set to dramatic music. The title read, "HOA Karen climbed my fence for a swim. Guess who was waiting on the other side?" It blew up online, thousands of views in days, strangers commenting that it sounded like something out of a sitcom. I watched it once, chuckling at the absurdity, then closed my laptop and walked outside. The night was quiet, the pool water still. No fences rattling, no shouting, no chaos. Just peace. And for the first time since Karen had entered my backyard uninvited, I finally felt like my home was mine again.